I played a little bit of. I played the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo. I
Thoughts?
finally forced myself to play it. I played that. I played the first hour's worth of Final Fantasy VIII.
What'd you think about 7?
Um,
Can't just say you
that's
played it and not say shit about it. Just give me something.
I
It don't
love
got
the
to be
way it
long.
looks. I love all of the visuals.
Okay.
They really reduced, like severely reduced the game and the fun of playing the game by doing what they've done to it. Like the visuals, everything else is perfect. Like Barrett's just as corny as he always was, and it works. Uh, but the battle system is awkward. It's not smooth. It doesn't work well. It's going to take a lot of practice to smoothly transition between characters while giving orders, while actively trying to track everything because you're controlling one at a time instead of the whole crew. You don't have an active time battle system where you can you're still getting wailed on by enemies, but you've got a moment to you. It's not like you can sit there and assign specific activities and cast spells whenever you want to. It doesn't work that way. You can run up and wail on stuff constantly, and there are enemies that will just tear you apart. Like those scrawny little soldiers, they're like tech soldiers or robot soldiers or some shit. In the very first area, when you take out the Mako reactor, are the toughest enemies in the game next to the boss in the demo. And they run around. They don't take a lot of damage from you. They move too frequently and attack too frequently for your heavy attacks to work. Your light attacks don't do tons of damage. They don't take a shitload of damage from magic. Lightning works good, but you can only cast magic when your active time bars are filled.
Yeah.
And they fill by taking damage, giving damage, passage of time, and you're not dealing it. It's just it's not a great system. Like they shoehorned uh, a weird, slightly deeper Kingdom Hearts system into a game that was meant and built with battles built around these, like the more strategic turn based. If they had I would have been much more impressed and been 1,000 times happier if they had kept the basics of a turn-based combat and deepened it and added more flourishes and more touches and more systems to play with. Like they don't have to keep the combat exactly the same, but like if they had brought in the fact that you don't stand in a row because that just doesn't make sense, And I could see how some people think that's a little corny. So, like what they did in Final Fantasy X too, where you launch an attack, and wherever that attack carries you, by the time you're done doing your action, that's where you're standing then. Or they could have done it like Parasite Eve, where you can move around until your bar is filled, so you can dodge AoEs and things like that. But then when your bar is filled, you can take your attack, you can cast any spell, you can use any item. As long as it's your turn, you can do anything you want. But in this, that's not the case. So you might be getting wailed on by enemies and you need to heal, but you can't fucking cast a spell because your bar's not up yet. You can wail on people, but you can't cast a spell and you can't use the items that are in your fucking hand.
I think it'd be kind of cool if like they made a game with that was a single player game, but it had kind of an MMO style for the combat, right? Where like when you fight a boss, there's like a fuckload of mechanics they dump on you that you do with your team. Not super hard, obviously. We're not looking for like blow your balls kind of stuff.
This used some MMO mechanics with the boss fight.
Yeah, and they had like hiding behind. Yeah, I don't want to say they're MMO mechanics, but mechanics. I remember seeing
MMO-esque mechanics.
Yeah.
You gotta like they used deeper mechanics than you normally see
But it'd be
in your average hack and slash game.
It'd be cool though. Like you hop in and Cloud's got like. I mean, I know that'd be kind of a lot, but Cloud starts, I don't know, with like 10 things, right? He has a basic combo, and then he has all these other combos or other attacks that he can do. And then as you level and slot material, do whatever, it gives you access to these other abilities, and you can mix and match them all on this one big bar, like an MMO. and then just make the game with the story and all that other stuff. I'm basically saying just make more 14, just prettier 14, but
Well, yeah,
that'd
you
be
can do
interesting.
that.
I'd do that, and
You could totally
I'd
do that.
I would allow more active battle RPGs if they had more complexity, like you're saying, to the combat instead of just hit something till it falls over and then use spells when you can, kind of thing.
That's why the Shin Megami Tensei and the Persona games are so interesting. And in each variation of those games, the battle systems are just familiar enough that you can dive in easily, but it takes time to master. Even Persona seems like your normal turn-based battle, but if you just go in treating it like Final Fantasy II or Dragon Warrior, you're going to get your ass handed to
Oh yeah,
you.
especially on the higher difficulties. If you're not
Yeah,
aware of what
like
you need to do, like when I played, because I played not on the hardest because it came out after for some reason, but the
you
second
played it on the hardest that was on release date.
yeah, it was the hardest that was available when the game released, and I didn't know you can change it till much later, and I just said fuck it, I'm not gonna. I have all my team set up already. I'm not gonna have to redesign everything to do the hardest stuff. But like, there's so much like freedom and like control you have over your team and like what you can and can't do in combat. Like I've watched people that have made like personas so OP that they can like on the hardest difficulty just fight the final boss with Joker alone by himself, kind of thing and shit like that. Like, and these systems are all just in the game and they're there. The devs put them there for you to find, and it's like you have so much room to explore. That's one of the reasons that my Persona playthrough was like 160 hours or some shit. 120, 160. I don't know. I played Persona 5 for a long fucking time. Because a lot of it I spent was messing with the executing personas and blending personas, inheriting skills and all that other shit, and finding shit that works. I remember there was a glitch for leveling that there was like this Reaper that went through mementos, and you can cheese him because there's a debuff that will spawn when there's like a certain weather effect going on, and you can cheese him and it will like curse him and he'll die after a few turns. You just have to survive his attacks, and you get a shitload of money and experience. So I did that for an entire day, bro. Like I just sat there and killed Reapers all day, and took all like the money I had and all the experience I had gained on these different personas and started like blending and shit. It was just so much fucking fun. Like it reminded me of like earlier Pokemon, just not as deep. Earlier Pokemon wasn't as deep, but earlier Pokemon had a lot of freedom and range when you started like going in to min max your teams and finding proper natures and finding like proper like breeding patterns and all this other shit. Like you have so much freedom and range to do whatever the fuck you want, on top of just being in this really kind of vast feeling world and doing all this shit. It was just dope. And Persona gives you that same vibe. So I'm at the point where Final Fantasy's cool and 14 is still my baby. But like all these mainline games, I'm just gonna say sayonara to them, and I'll just play Persona if I want like really good turn-based JRPGs.
It's just unfortunate. Square had this knack for doing these incredible stories, like, and they were epic. Like, whereas the Persona games tend to be more personal, right? They tend to be smaller conflicts.
Oh yeah,
You're not fighting for the fate of the universe, you're fighting for the fate of a town, or you're fighting for the fate of five souls, or what have you. Like, their Persona is a much more personal quest for the heroes, and it has a definitive beginning and a definitive end. And the events of the Persona games are the result of the universe that they're in. You know, they're in this shared multiverse, the Shin Megami Tensei multiverse, and then you got the Last Bible series, and the Devil Trigger series, and the Devil Summoner series, and Devil Survivor, and so on. And they're all these incredibly deep systems where you can play them on like a surface level and possibly make it through the game. All right, it'll be tougher, but if you learn the system and you learn it organically, and they're not hard systems to learn, they just take some practice. But there's so much that you can do with them. And with the old Final Fantasies like 7, 8, excuse me, 9, etc., they had some depth and some complexity that you could tap into, and some of that was just learning how to abuse the system or taking advantage of the system in ways that the devs hadn't originally developed, like some of the things you could do with materia in Final Fantasy VII. The devs just didn't imagine people would come up with those specific combinations of things. But it's just every Final Fantasy VII game has been different, and I've come under fire before for saying that I just want things to be like they've always been, and that's simply not true. All right, I'm not looking for this 7 to be the same as the old 7. I don't mind, and even if it was, I'd be fine with that. If you just gave 7 a complete facelift and it played the same way, I would be fine with that. I'd be completely fucking happy.
I think most
But if you
people would
wanted
be.
to sit there and take the combat system and do something new with it, yes, do that. That's fucking fine. I'm happy about that, but it should still be rooted in that turn-based idea. And it's got this thing where you can hit a button and time will slow so that you have time to go through your menus and pick the special action that you can do with your active timing. Because all the ATB does now is allow you to use your abilities. Otherwise, you're hack and slash.
Yeah.
So if it powers up, you can go into one menu and use your natural abilities that come with your class, with your character, or you can cast a spell, or you can use an item. And depending on what you're doing, it uses up a certain amount of energy. It's ridiculous that you can't just cast a spell whenever you can take an action. I guess what they've done is it's more like instead of it being turn-based, you're allowed to attack as much as you want, but anything other than a normal attack you have to wait to do until your meter fills up. But it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right in a Final Fantasy game, and it doesn't feel right in that game. If they had come up with a really interesting battle system like a Persona or like something that combines different pieces of 7, 8, 9, 10, 2, 13, and allowed you to, because 13 you could go in and you could give commands, but you could actually set, if you plotted it out right with the right weapons and the right gear, you could have them fight on their own and win. Like, I didn't like that, but I thought it was interesting that somebody could actually set it up as an auto battler, and the battles would start, and they could put the controller down and just fucking monitor. You know, that's interesting. That's interesting that you put that ability out there. And it doesn't feel like they tried. It feels like they were like, all right, well, the Western audience doesn't like turn-based, even though we know they do now. But they seem to just not, it doesn't sell as much. And we really want to make as much as humanly possible. So we're going to make it a hack and slash because Americans are stupid. And that's what they can comprehend.
I mean,
And then we'll add in some of this other stuff so that our
yeah.
longtime fans don't have anything to complain about. And it just doesn't work for me. It's like halfway. There are elements that are interesting. It's kind of interesting being able to jump on the fly between characters, but 90% of the time, I like the way you do it by pressing, I think it was on the D-pad for the PlayStation 4, is strange because you're busy controlling with the thumbsticks and the face buttons and the triggers, doing your attacks and things. So then you got to stop and press this thing and then hold this other button and do a combination. Like it's a little overly complex when it doesn't have to be. But visually and thematically, I think it nails it. Like Biggs and Wedge behave exactly like they should. Jessie is exactly like she should have been. Like Jessie had this huge crush on Cloud. She was one of the last ones to die.
That's
I
the girl
think
with
her, Biggs, and Wedge.
the girl with the armor titties, right?
Yeah, she's got
Yeah.
plate armor on her.
Oh yeah.
It's not really. It's just like one fucking cuirass.
Armor.
It's like a cuirass,
Armor
actually.
titties.
Armor titties.
I was
Jesse's there.
no
Everyone
cap.
sounds right. The design is really good. Like there's been a lot of thought that went into how everything was supposed to look.
Nice.
Um, so I feel like they really nailed almost everything. But I don't like the combat system, and it's really kind of annoying. And I know that after a while I'll get used to it. But I don't want to fly through battles like that. I want to have to sit there and think and plot out an attack, and you're not doing that when you're when you're running through like Devil May Cry and switching back and forth between heavy and light attacks, and then I don't know, man. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it fits the game at all. It's awkward. It doesn't work incredibly well, and I know if once I'm used to it, I'll be able to make it work better, but it shouldn't be the kind of thing where I have to get used to it for it to feel like it's working well.
I'm interested that, I mean, there's obviously the typical backlash you get from these decisions, but I'm interested that it hasn't been larger from the Final Fantasy community. Like, they're still going on with these. Like, people, like, in general, from what I've heard about 15, for the most part, people liked it, even though we have our issues with it that we've gone into detail multiple times. Like, if you did something like this to, like, Pokemon, right? That it's different communities, but that community would fucking riot if their games are no longer turn based.
We were rioting when 13 came out. We like the thing about the Final Fantasy community is it's like split in thirds. You have one third that's just never happy, but they buy all the shit.
They
It's
buy
true.
all this shit,
Like
bro.
they
That's so
bought
fucking.
six,
I think
and they
every
like the last time that third was happy was when six came
I
out.
think every
And it
community has that percentage
yeah,
of players. Like, I fucking hate every decision you've made over for the last 15 years, but
but
I've
here's the
bought in
money.
every single product.
Yep.
So
Yep.
nothing will change. It's
And that's
fucking
like one
awful.
third. And those are the people that were good when it like and don't get me wrong, they're not all old fuckers either. There's a lot of younger ones that are just like that, where they're like,
Yeah.
I played six. I really liked six and I liked how it played. And then I thought you just lost something with seven, but it was okay. And then you lost something with eight, and then you lost something with nine, and then you lost something with 10, and then I'm like, what motherfucker, really? Like for me, like I loved seven. Seven blew me away. But I also loved six. And I also loved four. And I loved I've never been blown away by the first one. I played it like 5 or 6 times.
Mhm.
It doesn't really have much of a narrative. The characters are they're all generic. They don't have any personality traits.
Mhm.
So it's just never struck me as interesting. Because I didn't play it when it was huge. I played it like 8, 10 years after it came out for the first time. Like I started with Dragon Warrior, and Dragon Warrior was the same way. Your character doesn't have any personality. Dragon Quest. It isn't until Dragon Quest 2, Dragon Quest 3, Dragon Quest 4 where all the characters had these really unique personalities, and the world was much more alive, and people reacted to you and had conversations with you, and so on. And then after I played those games, I played Final Fantasy. And it was like taking a step back. Like I loved the design, and the world was instantly familiar because if you played one JRPG, fantasy
Yeah.
JRPG, you pretty much played them all
Yeah.
in terms of stepping into a fantasy world. Um, but it was just very rudimentary. But the designs are iconic, and they've carried over, and that's and the music's iconic. So when you play
Umatsu, oh boy.
six, which was like an opus, it was one of the big ones,
Yeah.
and it had like one of the more really interesting, complex plot lines, and it's just vast and epic, and
6 was
it's
Kefka, right? It had Kefka in it?
yeah, Kefka,
Okay.
hmm Kefka and Garland.
When they did the
I think it was Garland.
they recently had a Final
Garland might have
Fantasy
been
villains
4.
list, and I think Kefka was like either number 1 or number 2. I need to find it. The only other thing I remember about that list is the fact that Emmett, which is from 14, he was like a little bit past 10. I think he was like 10, 11, 12, something like that. One of those. But I thought that was pretty dope. Yeah, it was just villains though, like people's favorite villains from the franchise.
I think 7 was an extremely complex plot that wasn't even completely in that game. Like they had a story for that game, then the story builds out with the cell phone game, with the prequel game, with the sidequel sequel game, the Dirge of Cerberus, which fills the space between Final Fantasy 7, the Turks game, and the sequel game, and an Advent Children, which
Crisis Core was
closes
the
the arc
prequel,
off.
right? With
Yeah,
Zack.
yeah, there's
Okay.
Crisis Core and then Turks
I
and
love
then
Crisis Core.
Crisis Core happens after Turks, during and after. No, I'm sorry. Turks happens during and after Crisis Core. That was a cell phone game. And then Final Fantasy VII, and then there was also like some short stories and shit. And then there was Dirge of Cerberus, which is essential, and it is a good game. It's not a great game because it's wonky.
How did Dirge of Cerberus play? Did it play like
It
menu-based,
was
turn-based? Or was it like
no,
action?
it was action, but it was meticulous action. Like you didn't just run in and shoot stuff because you would die. Like
Gotcha.
you couldn't play it as a run and gun. Like you had to carefully figure out how you were going to approach a situation, and then depending on what you were using, you might be how you changed your weapon because your weapon would transform. You would it changed how the character played depending on what weapons you were using.
This
And
Vincent dude
from
looks
what I
badass.
remember, if you rounded a corner and didn't think your way through what you were doing, you would die.
So it's a shooter.
It is a shooter, but it's not turn
It's
based,
like a
but
tactical shooter.
a
I don't
little
know what
bit,
the term
yeah.
is for that shit.
It's not exactly tactical either, but you have to. It's so hard to explain, man. I remember
What was this
there
on?
there were
PlayStation 2.
PlayStation 2.
$8.
It's really I enjoyed it a lot, but I also enjoyed it because the cutscenes were done by the same team that did Advent Children.
Isn't
So
that
you
like an in-house studio? That's like us, the Square. They had like their own
yeah,
in-house visual works, like Square Visual Works, some shit. Because they're the same people that today make like the 14 stuff, all the 14 shit.
yeah.
I watched a
Um
video. There was this dude. I forget the name of the channel.
well no, Advent Children was made by the dregs of what was left of the team that made the Final Fantasy movie, Spirits Within.
Yeah, well,
After
that was Visual Works too. It was just
yeah,
it's
then they were
changed over
shut
the
down,
years.
and the members that they kept were absorbed back into because it was a
They're
separate
in-house.
part of Square, and then they were just kind of absorbed back in.
I'm gonna see if I can find the video so I can send it to you. But there is one that's basically talking about fucking. It's like just the animation behind
Yeah, they're
14 and that
amazing.
studio. Yeah, they're fucking clean as hell.
There's like some Hawaiian cats in there because they had the studio split up. I think they had one branch in Hawaii, one branch in Japan, and then another branch of it I think was in California. And the California one was I think the first one to shut down. But Dirge of Cerberus, depending on what weapon you were using, it was either a tactical shooter, a strategy shooter, or an action shooter. Because your sniper rifle, your shotgun, your pistols, and your machine gun-esque type thing, each changed the play style. But it wasn't something where you could just run in and shoot things and dodge bullets. Like it was much deeper than that and a little bit more complicated. Some of the battle mechanics were kind of janky.
Mm-hmm.
I died a lot. I remember that,
There
and
we
there were
go.
several
I found it.
battles where. Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, the channel I'm sub to them. They're called the Canepa Effect, and they talk a lot about animation in general. And then it says how Square Enix created Final Fantasy 14 incredible trailers, and it just talks about Square Enix visual works and all the stuff that they've worked on, the history of their works, and it talked about again the Final Fantasy movie they made all the way back. The movie was trash. They made all the way
I
back in the
like that
day.
movie.
I did
It's
not.
not. It's not great. Like at the time, for the time that it came out, the visual spectacularness of it, the realism of it was
Yeah, yeah.
that of the same effect that Half-Life 2 had on video games.
I
When
got you.
Half-Life 2 came out, people could not believe the amount of facial animations they had managed to squeeze onto a character and how realistic they moved and how they looked. Like you'd never seen anything like that before. And when they did the characters and the spirits within, it was the same thing. Like everyone just had their minds blown. The problem is that the story, while a really interesting science fantasy, it wasn't a Final Fantasy story.
No, yeah.
It
It
was
felt
just
like
a really
yeah, it's
yeah.
just weird. I
They
remember
had
watching
they
with
had
my
Sid,
dad.
of course.
He's like, you played those Final Fantasy games, right? They have a movie, and I'm like, what? And we sat down. We're like, yeah, that was something.
They had a series too. The other thing was there's this weird motion blur on everything in that movie, which makes it a little hard to watch sometimes. But
Bro, I would.
I liked it.
It's never gonna happen, but I would pay all of my money. You're listening, Square. I know you are. I would pay all of my money for you to make another Final Fantasy movie that looks as good as the trailers for 14. I would watch the fuck out of that. It doesn't have to be related to any of the games. It would be cool if they made a 14 movie, kind of encapsulating the story. That's a lot of story to cover, and there's no way in hell that'd be like a 80-hour movie. But I would love something like that, because I think the 14 trailer for Shadowbringers is like one of the things, like, from recent memory, is like the most excited I've ever been for like something out of a video game from just a trailer alone. Like, it was so fucking good. Everything about that trailer is excellent. It's like
It's been a long time
practically
since something
art.
got me excited.
Yeah,
I
and
remember watching the trailer for Final Fantasy VII on a VHS tape. I still have that tape. It's
that's
worth
awesome.
money. And it's funny because it starts off with like it was the first game of its kind to have that much money spent on it.
That's crazy.
And they even quoted, I don't remember how much it was, but the advert quoted it. And it plays, of course, it plays that same song that plays in every Seven trailer. Doo 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 doo, with the fucking strings, and it's all eerie. Camera zooming into Midgar, everything looks grungy and nasty. And then you see Aerith picking up the flower and so on. Then the camera zooms out and you see the Loveless posters and shit.
Yeah, it's
Um,
dope.
I remember seeing that and I was like, holy shit, I've never seen anything like this. And
Rewind that VHS tape right the fuck now.
I
Take
watched
that shit
it
out,
like
rewind it.
90 times,
Same.
like so many times. I was so
That's
excited.
exactly how I treated.
saved up, I think I bought a PlayStation before that. I don't remember what I bought it for, but I know that one of the reasons I was buying a PlayStation was because I knew that Sony was, or not Sony, but Square was going to be bringing Final Fantasy to that platform, and I wanted to play it. And so I bought it for 7. I loved 7. I was the first person in line. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to Electronics Boutique, which is what later merged with GameStop. Electronics Boutique was the original terrible software company. Like they merged with GameStop, and GameStop was actually a good video
Is
game store.
Electronics Boutique the same as EB Games?
Yes,
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Electronics Boutique Games. Yeah,
My
EB.
the hamster started spitting in my head, and after the smoke cleared, I made that connection. So I
Yeah,
was like,
EB was terrible. Everybody hated it, just
I'm
like
pretty
they
sure they
hate
still are
GameStop.
terrible.
They don't exist anymore.
Well,
But they
I think they do somewhere, just not around us. I'm pretty
well
sure I've seen them recently. EB Games.
the board from EB transitioned over to GameStop
There's one in
and
Miami.
just wiped out their board. So the way that EB was being run, the from top down was what basically moved into GameStop structure, and then all of the EBs were renamed GameStop. So they took the GameStop brand because it wasn't tainted, and then just basically got rid of everything else. GameStop used to do this thing. It was just constant: buy 2 get 1 free all the time, every day. Use games, and they did a brisk trade in used games. We used to go and buy tons of games all the time. It was fucking fantastic. When they merged with EB, that shit went away, and then it was like, oh, we're doing it as a special, like once every 6 months. You all should come in. It's super awesome. Even though they did it for a fucking decade beforehand,
I didn't know they were
every
Australia
day.
run.
Hmm?
They're apparently they're stationed in Australia, like, or that's where their main shit is. They have 300 stores over there.
EB?
Yeah, well, there's one in Miami and in
They must
Aventura.
have branched off then, or sold that portion of the
Oh,
business
well, I
off.
guess Aventura is
Um,
Miami. It was fucking stupid.
But I was there. Woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I went to the mall. The moment the mall opened, I was standing in front of the that metal pull down gate thing
Yeah, the security gates.
at Electronics Boutique, and I was the first person in line. I got my copy of Final Fantasy VIII. It was the very first time I'd ever seen a line for a video game. Now I know that happened when Super Mario 2 came out. I think it was Super Mario 3.
I don't know.
There were lines because they had a shortage on the carts. But in terms of like pre-order for a game you knew was going to be there and you got in line for it anyway, like that was the very first time I'd ever seen that happen. 7 was so big and so influential and was such a game changer from a visual perspective that the world was just like fucking could not wait. And then 8 came out, and 8 was the very first game. It wasn't the first one to have a romance in it, but it was the first one where the theme was love. And that didn't mean that the whole thing was a love story. Part of it was, But instead of making the theme life, which basically means fucking anything, it's the dumbest theme ever to make the theme life. Because then you're like, all right, well, we're the whole story is about painting a house because that's part of like life because it's a job. Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous. Every theme since then has been life. Every theme before then was life. But 8, they came out and said it was love, and a lot of people scratched their heads at that. And they didn't. The battle system was a little broken. I never really noticed a problem with it, but a lot of people either had a difficult time with it or said it was too easy. It was the first game where, as you leveled up, all the enemies you faced would level up. So if you went for like a handful of levels, it wasn't like you could start in your beginning zone and grind out the enemies there, and then for the rest of the game you could one hit kill all of them. Like if you were to leave and come back, there was another 2 gradients of difficulty that would get stacked onto them as you went up. Now eventually you would over level so much that they
It
just
just
wouldn't be
wouldn't
able to
matter.
keep up anymore.
Yeah.
But they did get a little bit tougher and then a little bit tougher as you went up, so that you were always having a higher chance of some kind of challenge.
Yeah, so it's like
And
a
the
like a
story,
like a light scaling kind of thing. It's not like a heavy scaling where it's like literally 1-to-1, but it's like, oh hey, you're like level 30. You know, these bitches, they're strong. I like that. It makes me feel like a world is more alive because it wouldn't make
Mhm.
sense that you start in a starting town. I don't know. I don't know. I
It's the
feel
only
like
game I've ever seen them do it with. I think they had 3 gradients of difficulty, and like there was like they would be a certain toughness up to level 10, and then like it was like in thirds. Like when you outdistanced their original level by a certain amount, it just didn't matter anymore. But until then, they weren't just going to be. You couldn't just steamroll them. You would still have to be at least slightly careful, which was interesting because they've never done that since then.
it's
And
funny.
they also had a junction system in that, which I haven't seen them use again. Um, but it did take some inspiration from 6, because when 6, when you'd have a character using a specific spirit, their summons in 6, that spirit would give you stat boosts. And in the junction system, your spells that you were using came from your summon. So you would have a summon that would give you a selection of spells and a selection of stat boosts, and there was something a little bit more that went along with it. I don't recall. And I know that the story was just as was almost, if not more so, complex. No, I wouldn't say it was as complex as 7, because 7 is still fucking out there. But it was pretty complicated. Like 8 was complicated, and there is some wonky plot parts. Like your character is clearly in love with someone, and she gets put at risk, and he goes through hell and high water to rescue her. And then he rescues her. He gets her back to safety. And the moment they put foot on solid ground, like somebody comes up and says, "No, you've got to turn her back over to us. She's a danger to the world, etc., etc." And then this fucking dipshit, he's like, "Okay."
all
Like
right.
I'm. I mean, it's basically like that. He's you. I mean, they didn't. I mean, they could have been a little bit
You're
clearer
saying he's a
on
soy
some
boy.
things.
I feel it.
He didn't believe in himself at all. He had this moment of gumption to where he went and rescued her after all his friends said, "Hey asshole, the woman you love is in prison in space. What
Space
are you
prison.
going to do?" And he's like, "Well,
I heard
I mean, I
space
guess
prison does
yeah.
space butt sex, and that's the worst.
Yeah, space butt sex is
No,
difficult
it's not.
because the
It's not.
lube
No,
doesn't
there
stick."
is no lube.
Anyway, the long story short is I loved 8. I really loved 8. I didn't get to finish it because the 4th disc fell behind a bookshelf, which I didn't know, so it just vanished as far as I knew. So I'm excited to get back into it and finally finish it, but it was like my favorite. And then I played 9, and 9 felt like a step back in terms of gravity. Like there was some heart-wrenching tragedy in it, but it didn't go nearly as dark as what you saw in 7 or 8 or even 6. It felt like it was a lighter affair, and 9 is a lot of people's favorites. Like a lot of people came into. Seems like there was like these generations. Like you had a generation that came in at 6, you had a generation that came in at Jump with the old ones. You generation at 6, a generation at 7, and then a generation at 9, and then your next generation was 10 on PlayStation 2. That was their first one, and everybody loves their first one. Like that's a solid thing. Like I know people that their fondest memory was with Tidus and Yuna, and I get it. Like that was a great game. It was a good story. It was a little wonky in trying to explain how Tidus is a sentient dream. Is he the spirit of the Tidus? Is he a clone essentially? A copy? Is he a totally different person?
Spoilers.
Never really clear to me.
Um, fucking. My first one was. I didn't actually like my first one. It was the one with lightning.
13 Final Hallway. Yeah,
Yeah, I
they were trying
fucking.
something new with that. The
It was
what came out
pretty. It's
before
just like
13?
it. But like every time I talked about it with my friends, they're like, "Oh no, you gotta go back and play the other ones, brother. They're like so much better." I'm like, "Oh okay, what should I start with?" They're like, "I don't know, like 9, 10." No one ever told me about 6. I never got to 6. But
6 it's 16-bit, but 6 has an amazing story, and it's got really interesting characters, and it's a wide cast of characters, and they all get development time.
yeah, I just know about
It's like a 60-hour game.
Kefka's story and shit. But
Um, I don't know what happened with 13. Like I
okay,
played 13, and I felt like something was missing.
yeah, and
That's all. It felt like
I think
I loved it,
it was a
and the
lack.
visuals.
I think it was a lack of, because we knew that they were not only hurting for money, they were dumping all the money they were getting into this new I don't remember Crystal what engine. It was the Crystal something engine. They make this really cool engine,
Yep.
and they make 13 out of it, and realize that there's a lot of limitations to the engine, and it fucked up a lot of shit. It's one of the other reasons that 14 got so fucked is because it was made in that engine originally with a bunch of spaghetti code that they had to rework for when they did what was it called? Realm Reborn, when they remade the entire game, just nuked the world and like, okay, we're starting over. We're gonna kill everybody. We're gonna start over. Well, not
I
everybody.
like what they
Most
did
people.
for those players, though. Like there was a lot of love for
Oh
the
yeah, the
players.
legacy
That's
players
fine.
got a bunch of cool shit because they suffered through the early painful stages of 14. But
Yep.
yeah, and I think just that they spent all this time and they're like, we have to use this engine. Like we fucking Polly's resorted to it. They're like, but it's there's like issues with it, and it's hard to write certain like coding instances, and it's like we and they're like, no, fucking use it, and you're like, shit. Well,
It wasn't even the Crystal engine at the time. It wasn't the one. It was the Luminous engine that was used on 13.
I thought
That
13
was
was
their first
I thought
hard to
13
write. I
was
think it was
the
called the
first.
Luminous engine.
I thought 13 was the first Crystal engine.
No, 13 was the first one in the Crystal series. They were making these games that were supposed to be all linked in the same universe, just different stories. And then when they realized that that was a exceptionally dumb idea to try and stretch over 10 years, or what ended up being much longer, they're like, all right, fuck it. We're the Fabula Crystal Novalis, or
It
whatever the
was in
fuck
the
they called
Crystal
it.
Tools engine. 13. 13 was Crystal Tools. It was the
Well,
first
yeah,
Crystal Tools game.
then the one after that was used on 15 was the Luminous engine.
Yeah, because they don't use Crystal anymore because it's fucking dog shit. It's just
Yeah,
funny
but
that
so was the one they used on 15. Like they keep picking these high maintenance, they like powerful in visuals, but just limited in every other way. Engines to try and make games with, rather than saying fuck it. Look at what they're doing right with engines that do really well, like Unreal. Unreal is like some of the best lighting in the business. Find out why.
yeah,
You know,
it's
like if you're
interesting
gonna
because
write your own engine, make it something you can use.
like we all know that like the Japanese as a whole, at least you and me know that they had this like this stubbornness to them, and there's a term for it that I remember someone talking about. But like when it comes to like design ideas or programs or stuff that's like used outside of their bubble, they're stubborn to adopt those practices. It's just something with the way they think and they work. It's like it has to be either made in house or something that we've designed or something like that. They're not quick to use things that they know are doing well in regards, because like fighting games have this issue. The reason Japanese fighting games have shitty netcode like 8 times out of 10 is because they're using all these old ass backwards netcode like systems, and it ends up fucking them over instead of adopting the better Western netcode systems. Like there was a video I watched that what's his face, Maximilian, the dude that does the fight. He has a fighting game YouTube channel. He made this long ass video talking about all of it, and when it comes to netcode and how, and then he I don't know if he coined the term, but he said the term basically like they live within this bubble and they won't accept outside practices.
It's weird because they used to have no problem taking somebody else's technology ideas and employing it in a new way, or building on that idea. And at some point in time, because I'm not saying copy our games, like that's what they're doing now. They're trying to make their games into Western games, and that's not why we play them in the first place. It's obnoxious. But in terms of the way somebody does lighting, or the way they incorporate this into an engine, or the interesting ways they found around, like what they did with Crash, how they were able to put so many colors and polygons, and they were able to push graphics in a certain way on the PlayStation 1 when it couldn't technically do that. Look at that and take that inspiration when you're approaching putting a game on the platform. See what they did there, and maybe do some of that if you need to, or break outside the box. They don't think outside of the box. That's the fucking problem. They don't think outside the box. They made their own graphics engine, which again, for a long time they were stuck on, it's got to be the most beautiful thing in the entire universe, because that's what we're known for. Because we knocked the socks off with 7, we knocked the socks off with 8, we knocked the socks off with 9. We just kept doing that shit because all of our games were fucking amazing looking. And I know they also had another complaints they had about, I don't remember if it was narrative or something with the last game that had come out. I think it was 11 or 12. 12? It was 11 was the MMO, so 12 was the one with Vaughn, and it was the first Final Fantasy that wasn't high fantasy. It was like a faux MMO. That was another one that took me a long time to love. Like when I started playing it, it was like, because I just come off of 10-2, then they did the MMO. Actually, they did an MMO before 10-2, but they did 10, they did 10-2. I loved that sequence right there, those two games. And then they did 12. And 12 was like, there wasn't any high magic. Yeah, like you, but it was this massively dense game. There was hunts, there were fights that would take hours. And even though at first it you didn't have control over your entire team, or it didn't feel like it, because you had to slowly build your AI for your companions. You could jump into them at any time, like you can in the 7 remake. But the way the game functioned was very much like an MMO, with like auto attacks and things of that nature. And then you'd have to queue different abilities to work. It played like an MMO, like the way that 14 does a little bit. Like if you ever have a chance, I would suggest trying what one of their side projects was. Like it was one of those instances where they took a mainline game and they deviated too far. Now, critically, it was a darling because they did a lot of new things with it. The art style was incredibly fresh. They had this kind of watercolor art style.
Ooh, I like watercolor.
Yeah, like the characters look really, really. If you look at any of the pictures of it, now granted, it's obviously from an older time. It's PlayStation 2, so it's a little bit rougher around the edges, but the characters have this watercolor art to them, like the textures on the outfits, the walls, the faces, everything is much softer. It's really, really interesting how they did the art in that game. But the characters carried the game, which is important in a Final Fantasy game. The characters have to be able to carry the game.
Yeah, you
And
gotta.
even though you weren't in a turn-based environment anymore, which was the part that was the most difficult for me to adapt to, over time the story and the characters really pulled me in, and I enjoyed playing it, and I finally adapted to it. It's still not my favorite battle system. I still think that some version of turn-based should be used, an active turn-based even, but you should not be just constantly attacking. Like there should be some kind of format there. But I think it was still a better battle system than in what is in 7 Remake and what is in Kingdom Hearts. It works for Kingdom Hearts because Kingdom Hearts isn't trying to be Final Fantasy.
Yeah, it's
It I
also.
don't I don't
Yeah, it's
I think
definitely
those.
it's. There's definitely a demographic of a difference in demographic too. I think, at least from their eyes, it may be loved by a lot, but it's still like it's like a kid's Final Fantasy, right? So you're not gonna have a super complex battle system, although they feel the need to make the story super complex for some fucking reason still.
even
But
though they promised they weren't going to do that.
yeah,
And it was so simple in the first one too.
yeah,
I think that the biggest divergences was 12, 13, and 15, and now the 7 remake. Because 12 was a faux MMO through and through. The way the powers work, the way you queued things, hunts, the fact that different times of day and different weather patterns would bring out different behaviors, different missions, different quests. People would say different things depending on when you talk to them. They wouldn't just say the same thing all the time. They really tried hard to make it feel like the world was alive, and it kind of worked. It really kind of worked. Uh, so it was different, and it didn't feel quite like a Final Fantasy game, but there was enough there that I loved it. But it's definitely not my favorite story. It's not my favorite um, battle system. It really feels like a spin-off, which is the same place that I would put 15, except 15 is unfinished. And that's the part that makes me angry about 15. I don't believe that 15 should have been a mainline entry. I don't believe that 12 should have been a mainline entry. But I think that 12 is a fantastic game, and 15 could have been.
yeah.
And I think that what is there is fantastic. It's just the holes in the story, the huge chunks that never got made that prevent you from getting all the story organically is pathetic. And I think that's what really kind of hammers it down for me, is they accomplished so much with it, but they didn't accomplish everything that I know they can, and that's what hurt me so much about 15. Whereas 12 was a self-contained story. You got everything. You understood everything. You were able to do everything if you so desired. Like, it was all there for you. It was just up to you to go in and get it. Whereas 15, there's just certain things you can't know unless you watch a half dozen videos, or you data mine it, or
Buy
you
some
go
DLC.
through. Yeah, even then, it still doesn't give you all the answers.
Yeah,
A
I
lot of
still
it,
remember just
you
like
have seen a painting in a hallway through a window that gives you this little hint, and then there was 2 seconds of a cutscene. In the background, there's a newspaper, and if you saw the picture on the newspaper and the headline, that gives you another hint. Like, when you have to fucking go that hard in a game to use little tiny Easter eggs to figure out what the entire story is, there's a problem.
well, Dark Souls would like to have a word, but that's
Dark Souls is
they've
designed
made it.
around the concept. This wasn't.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is a Final Fantasy game.
Also,
And now they've got 7 coming out, and 7 is a story that everybody knows and loves. You don't fuck with that. So if you're going to change things, you need to keep the heart and soul and the behavior of the game solid and the same as possible. And then the details that don't impact any of that is something you can change.
yeah. All right. Wow,
I don't know. It's just the remake is a disappointment for me. I will buy it. I will play it because I want to go on that adventure again.
uh,
And
yeah.
I'm not that third, man, because I'm not the one that every time a game comes out I don't like it. Because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
loved 7, I
Yeah,
loved
yeah.
8, I loved 9. I didn't like 9 as much as the others, but I wasn't disappointed by it.
Yeah.
I wasn't disappointed by 10. 10 was such a weird universe to get into, like with Spira and all that shit. It was such a different take that it took me a little while to kind of fall into the world, but after a while I loved the characters. I enjoyed it.
All right.
I even enjoyed 12, and 12 was fucking bizarre.
All right. Listen here.
I just don't understand
Anything else?
why they can't find a better balance to walk if they're going to remake something, or they're going to come into a new game. I feel like it's possible to give a new to think and build a new turn-based system that has a lot of new elements to it, and I don't think what they did in remake is the answer.
Because
But I'm
it's not
sure it will
trying
bring in a
to.
lot of new fans,
Yeah.
and they'll like it because they don't like old turn-based stuff.
Yeah. Well, the problem is they're not trying. They're not trying to answer the question that you have at the very least, which is finding that system. They're completely okay with pulling in the audience that doesn't like turn-based or is okay with action, and they've claimed, and I think is purely like bullshit for the people that are looking for it, that like, oh, there's elements of turn-based because of the ATV and stuff like that. It's like, no, there isn't,
Oh,
because
really?
it doesn't provide like the strategy's kind of there, but you slowing down time and requiring you to have like a mana bar to do any actions outside of auto attack is not necessarily turn-based. But
Well,
and
it's not auto attack; it's a manual attack. But you can like they.
I
I understand
consider
what
any
Sam was
attack
trying
that's
to say.
like I consider any attack that automatically chains and involves you just spamming a button in the same realm as an auto attack, because it requires no thought for the
Oh,
most part. You just
yeah, it's like God of War without the different combos. It's like God of War if you have one combo, and then if you only have two combos, and that's it. Like, but it's not that fast or fluid or smooth because they incorporated this other crap. Like they might as well have gone all in and just had you been able to combo shit and throw spells into the combo like you do in Kingdom Hearts, where you can just like attack, 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 fire, attack. You know,
yeah.
like they might as well have just fucking done that, and it would have been less confusing. I get again. I know the practice will work. The system, I'm sure, works fine. I'm sure they've tested it, but stopping combat to do slow or slowing down combat to do something like what happens in was it Fallout and a handful of other games is not turn based. It's not even close. And they have this classic mode, and classic mode is a dumpster fire where you auto attack. That is auto attack, like 100%.
It
All they
just
do
goes
is
on
they
its
jump
own.
in, they auto attack, they jump out. Jump in, auto attack, jump out. You don't have anything to do with that. The only thing you do is queue spells or items or abilities
Do they move on
whenever
their
the
own?
bars fill up. Huh?
Do they move on your own, or is it just if you get
They move on
close?
their own. No,
Oh,
like you have to move them around in between combat.
but when you get into combat, it's just like an auto battler starts, but you queue up the
Yes, it
spells.
plays like a cell phone game. It's garbage.
That is fucking
Like, do
weird.
not put it on classic. It's fucking doo doo.
That's fucking weird, dude. That's so
Yeah,
weird.
it's like they're like, hey, this is. I don't know why they call it classic. I don't get it.
There
What
is no
classic?
classic
What?
classic mobile game. All right.
Like, if it's classic, then the enemies attack when their bar fills up, and otherwise they're not attacking. They're not taking any aggressive action, and you would be doing the same until your bar fills up. That's not what's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. It's rough. The system's really rough, and it draws a lot of back from it. And I apologize that was so long-winded. It's kind of
That's
spun
fine.
out into a bunch of other
That's
things.
the main topic.
But 13 was doo-doo, and the story started out really good and just went fucking bananas. And there are still people that love that one. So
I just remember having a crush on one of the characters. I think it was the bitch
probably
that
Lightning.
woke up for like stasis. What's her name? Oh, she has pink hair.
Oh, the one that dies.
Yeah, Vanille, I think her name was.
Yeah, Vanille. I
Yeah,
think Vanille was. It was either her or Rain that dies. I don't remember
I think
which.
it's her. I don't fucking.
I think Vanille
I
was
thought
going to die, and Rain sacrificed herself in her place.
I thought she was cool.
Yeah, they were they were good characters, man. Zaz was a good character. They were all good characters. 13 would have been a better movie or series of movies. Like that should have been their big movie. Should have been 13.